fantastic to see so many of you today. And thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know, I'm Arndís Bergsdóttir. I'm a ROC's postdoc as well, and I'm the organizer of these lecture series. So today I have the pleasure of introducing ROC's postdoc Angela Rawlings, who will take us on a journey of Hvala becoming with whales through artistic research. Dr. Angela Rawlings is a Canadian Icelandic interdisciplinary artist researcher. She works with languages as dominant exploratory material. Their practice seeks and interrogates relationality between bodies, be they human, more than human, other than human, non-human, and so forth, mediating on languages as inescapable lenses of human engagement. Rawlings' methods over the past 20 years have included sensorial poetries, vocal and contact improvisation, theatre of the rural, and conversations with landscapes. So, Angela, once again, welcome. I am delighted to have you with us today. And without further ado, I'm giving the virtual floor now over to you.
Oh, tack för det, Arndís, and thank you so much for organizing the ROC's lecture series. It's a deep pleasure to be able to join this series, which has had just a fascinating selection of researchers present already over the past year plus. And it is so wonderful to see so many of you in our virtual room together. Hvala, so many people that I haven't seen in a very long time here, and also people that I haven't met before. What a deep pleasure. Anybody who knows me knows that I like to try to figure out a way to come into a bit of embodiment when we're in shared virtual space. So before we get going, I'm a little nervous, so I need to breathe deeply, and I'd like to invite you to do that with me too, kind of all breathe together. So find yourself a nice, comfortable position, feel the sits bones wherever you're seated, check in how your feet are if they're touching the floor. Maybe shrug your shoulders down with me. We're going to take a nice big inhale through our noses. Exhale through the mouth. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. One more in. And out. Oh, thank you for the collective breath. It certainly helped me to feel a little bit calmer. One of the other things I do when I'm getting ready to share is take off all of my jewelry one thing at a time. So I'm going to start to do that right now too. Fortunately, it's only the jewelry that comes off, nothing else. It's not like a game of strip poker or anything. So as Arndís mentioned, I work as an artist researcher, and it's been my deep pleasure for the past 2 years to be using artistic practices research as a methodology in order to look into becoming with whales through artistic research, becoming with whales in the time of climate crisis and biodiversity loss, becoming with whales in relation to Iceland. And I'm going to, for the duration of my talk, VJ up a little PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to see if I can do that now and share my screen. This is always this moment of truth and technology. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see here, I've titled my talk today, Hvala, Becoming with Whales and Artistic Research. Hvala is Icelandic. It's an Icelandic neologism, or a made-up word. I've been quite fond of turning to neologisms or portmanteau as a way to tune into or think through what might be the linguistic nodes or of necessity for now within the context of climate crisis and biodiversity loss. As somebody who's lived in Iceland for over a decade, I often find myself turning to Icelandic when I am engaging neologisms. And hvala for me takes a verb form, to, hvala would be whale, so to whale or to become with whale. And one of the things that I've been doing in my practice research is to think through what is the relation between humans and cetaceans, and what are the relations within an interdependence on shared ecosystems. A little bit of a mention too around becoming with, which I include within the subtitle there. I've been thinking quite a bit about becoming with or becoming through Astrida Nemenis's talk about becoming a body of water in her essay, Hydrofeminism. Also thinking not only about becoming with, not already being with, but how we might be continuing to come into relation to or in relation with as part and parcel of what becoming might mean, especially in relation to the more than human, but also our human counterparts. Thinking too about staying with, from Donna Haraway's book, Staying with the Trouble, becoming with or staying with as durational exercise, action, staying with through repetition, how we might stay with something longer and longer, that it becomes familiar and then it becomes unfamiliar or defamiliarized or estranged somehow, and we come to know it anew. And these are the kinds of methods that I engage within becoming with or staying with, notions of repetition, practices of estrangement or defamiliarization, attempts to acknowledge an unknowability, probably coming through biosemiotics as a teaching practice, and then also interrogating knowabilities. And I'm thinking here about maybe a sense of signifieds or signifiers within eco-linguistics. Do I actually know what I know? How do I know what I know? How am I defining what I think it is that I know? One of the other neologisms that I've been flirting with within a methods context is withness, 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 again, a neologism. So the becoming with or the staying with has the with within it, and thinking that these are states of withness somehow, also winking at how similar that word is to witness, and the necessity of witnessing, being with, becoming with, in our current time. Coming from anthropology, Marilyn Strathern argued that that particular field is about the relation, and I found that quite interesting, this idea of relationality. And I like to kind of position that next to Fiona Templeton's assertion that theater is the art of relationship. So also thinking about that becoming with or that withness as gentle actions of relationality. We have been watching in the slideshow a project that came out of the last 2 years of this postdoc work called Sonosphere, and I will go more into depth on that by the end of the talk. But since it has such yummy visual footage, I thought that that'd be a nice place to kind of start while we're thinking through relationality, signified, signifiers becoming with. The last thing I'll say before I move into the next part, back to the Hvala. I've been really interested, of course, in this word hval, which means whale in Icelandic. And for those of you who are so inclined to doodle or take notes while attending a lecture, I invite you to practice writing the word hval, HVAL, over and over again. I don't know if you can see it in my little thing here, but I find it's a really neat practice, again, within that sense of repetition, familiarity, defamiliarization, writing at different speeds, different sizes. As Arndis mentioned, I've been in a position of postdoctoral fellowship with the Research Center on Ocean, Climate and Society, based here in Iceland, affiliated with the University of Iceland, but also the University of Copenhagen, with funding through Carlsberg, Fundet, and Rawlings. I've just last month actually completed my postdoc research under the auspices of funding, but as we all know, as artist researchers who are in the room, the research doesn't stop just because we've ceased the funding somehow. That said, I thought that I would walk through 5 of the creative outputs that arose during my practice research, and then kind of talk through a bit of the conceptual framework as well as analyzing the process of each as we kind of plunk through them within this lecture. You can see the names of these particular creative outputs here: Hvalslag, Kor, Sphere Festival, Sonosphere, and Hvala i Måsen. There's such a wonderful loud sound outside right now. It's like the machine of breathing mindfulness. Okay. The first project that I would like to share with you, it's actually the last project to meet the world, but it's absolutely where I started my practice research. So the word hvalslag, again, it's a neologism, and here I'm thinking about the word hval or whale in Icelandic, lag, song, but then also thinking about the word landslag, which means landscape, and how hvalslag, whale song, could also be whalescape in a sense. At the outset of my practice research, I had been thinking quite a bit about mass whale stranding on Icelandic foreshores. Especially mass whale strandings of pilot whales. From 1981 until 2019, there were 7 mass whale strandings, and also during that time, there were almost 1,000 cetacean strandings around the country. Pilot whales themselves are the whales that they travel in herds, and they will strand en masse because they follow the matriarch, the leader of their herd. Stranding, there are many theories on how stranding happens or why stranding might take place. It could be that the herd is following an unwell leader. It could be that they are chasing prey into shallower waters. There were 2 mass whale strandings in 2019, and both of these occurred on what's called a spring tide. So it's when we have the largest inflow or outflow of ebb and flood. And both of those occurred when we had the largest, amount of water coming in or coming out. I was at the time in 2019 working a little bit as a reporter, and I had the opportunity to go to both mass whale strandings that occurred in Iceland in that year. You can see in the picture that we have here, this is located at Gamla Eyri in southwest Iceland, kind of the armpit of where Snæfellsnes meets the mainland, for those of you who know Icelandic geography. And at that location, there were 53 pilot whales that had stranded. When I was out at that particular location, I noted that the whales that were they were all in a very long line, and the ones that were on the outer edges had penises. And as we got closer to the center, more of the female whales were located in some calves as well. And right in the center of the line, there was a female whale that had half given birth. So a calf was coming out of the amniotic sac. And in discussion with a cetologist here in Iceland, one theory around that particular stranding is that the female whale who was having a difficult time giving birth had led the herd to strand. As you'll guess, having this kind of direct experience or interaction with witnessing with whales that have stranded, this volume of whales that have stranded, raised quite a bit of questions for me around what happens when whales strand in Iceland, what will happen going forward, and what has happened in the past. It also raised questions for me around what are the relationships, what could I look at that would also kind of seed or locate the relationships that have been forged within Icelandic society for 1,000 years in relation to cetaceans. One of the things that I found quite interesting is that there's an idiom in Icelandic, hvalreki, which translated would mean like a whale wreck or beached whale, but here it's used as it's used idiomatically to refer to something as a windfall or a great blessing, something that's arrived unexpectedly, but means good fortune. Hvalreki, beached whale. And idiomatically, that makes a lot of sense because in centuries past, if a whale were to speech. This could mean sustenance, sustainability, using most or all parts of the whale in order for humans to sustain in difficult circumstances. There is a law that's present within Iceland to this day. It's Hvalreki law, and it stipulates that the landowner of a location where a whale strands has the right to process the whale's remains as they see fit. In the past, of course, this would have been quite important to have a whale as resource strand in this way on somebody's property. Nowadays, I wonder how this particular law, which is still at play, starts to change in terms of how landowners engage with the whales that strand on their properties. Are they still considered this blessing? Is there a need to address how this law is in play, given that now landowners need to strategize how to remove the remains so as not to promulgate illness. At Gamla Eyri, I was present at the time when the landowner arrived also to, as he said, claim his Hvalreki. And the decision for him was to remove teeth of pilot whales, which is something that can be used within jewelry. This was the strategy on how to claim this particular Hvalreki in 2019. Otherwise, because these whales had stranded on what is an island where no humans live, there was a decision to just allow the sand dunes to kind of cover their bodies over time and no further removal. So the Hvalreki law is one of these notes that I became really interested in. What does it mean in terms of how it was in the past? Might it need to be revisited nowadays, given the shift in what it means to have a whale strand? And then the same with the term Hvalreki, where a whale stranded in the past and it would have been considered a windfall. What might this idiomatic expression mean now if we really put the whale back in Hvalreki, and what whale wreck might mean? I also became really interested in the prominence of the word whale within landscape components throughout Iceland. And at the outset of this practice research, I gathered together all of the places around Iceland that have the word hval in them. And there are just over 200. And you can see them listed on the left-hand side of the screen. And apologies for the extra mindfulness breathing sounds we can hear. The machine has returned briefly. On the slide that I have up present now, we have a little bit of a close-up that shows a few locations in the east of Iceland where we have place names, toponymy with whale in them. Hvalárfell, Hvalá, Hvalárfoss. And on the right-hand side, the map that I have posted here, you'll see all of the locations where there are places that have the word whale within them throughout the country. along the perimeter, not a surprise. You'll also see 3 pink stars, and I placed these here because some of the work that I started to do as I was thinking through artistic practice was to tune into what was stranding, what else was stranding aside from whales. On the left-hand side of the map, that pink star is where Gamla Eyri is located, where those 53 pilot whales stranded in 2019. And I mentioned that the landowner had gone to claim his kvalriki in the form of removing teeth from the pilot whales. When I was there, he ended up giving me the first 2 teeth that he sawed out of the jaw of one of the whales. And these teeth I then ended up using in Kvalslag as a project, thinking very much about the mouth, the relation in how things are working with dentals in terms of phonetics. I also have 2 other stars here. On the bottom left-hand side, this is near Jökulsárlón, or the glacial lagoon, and I found a cassette tape, part of a cassette tape that had washed up amongst the stranded or calved icebergs. And I kept this bit of very human trash and also kind of culturally loaded, set to a kind of 1980s sensibility object. To the right, the farthest to the right, on a beach in East Iceland in 2021, I found a record and a music album. And again, I was quite taken with finding this as something that had been in the ocean for a while and then had stranded and had been transformed by being present within the ocean. So these particular 3 things, the pilot whale's teeth, the cassette tape, and the album ended up forming kind of the basis to think through how to attune or form relation that might be both sonically but also orally related. And I had the opportunity to show work in Kunsthal Exnergas in Vienna, Austria, this past year, where I would show exactly these items. But as I was approaching doing it, I was really interested to work with that list of toponymy, those 200 whale place names. I was interested in working with that as a libretto, and I offered it to one of my collaborators who is based here in Iceland, José Luis Anderson, and he created a composition that was working with the place names. I'm going to attempt to play just a minute of this for everybody. Let's see if this works.
Hvalsnes, Hvalsstöng, Hvaltangi, Hvalveiðistöð. Áglaf, Ruðraglsgrunn, Hvalbakur. Hvalfjörubakkar, Hvalgjá. Hvalsfjörður, Hvalsveiðistöð.
So part of what Jose was working with there, he was using some field recordings, found field recordings of whales, whale calls. He also worked with several people here who are of foreign origin and also native born in Iceland, inviting them to improvise their way through how to speak or sing the place names as sonic material. Later on in the recording, there's a folk song that kind of comes up, which has a kind of folk song or almost a little bit of a rímur quality to it, but just using the place names to kind of carry it forward. One of the other things that I did, and as I mentioned at the outset, I was inviting you to write the word qual, 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 qual over and over again to see what it feels like to kind of bring this word into your own body. In addition to gathering all of these words, I then got really interested in what would happen if I were to spend time writing them down and writing them on a material that's also stranded. And in this case, this would be seaweed that I harvested from Grota, for those of you who, again, know Icelandic geography. And after drying the seaweed, it's surprisingly quite adept at holding ink. And I wrote all 200 plus place names on the seaweed. It was a slower process. It takes a little bit more time to write on the seaweed, to find the place within the folds and the bends to do this. And again, is a way that I started to kind of feel through, like both familiarizing but also estranging my relation with the place names and with the sense of what places, and also like emplacing text on this like landscape of seaweed. The final presentation, or the final installation on Kunstal Exnergas included Jose's composition, the seaweed with the place names, those whales' teeth, and both the cassette tape and the broken record. I'm, for the interest of time, not going to talk super much about the next pieces, but I do want to provide them as indicators of where else the practice research went for the duration of the postdoc. And the next piece I'd like to talk about is called kor, or kor. In Icelandic, kor would mean choir, chorus. So again, we have this kind of tuning in through sound. In the summer of 2021, I had the deep pleasure of partaking in a 2-week research trip aboard a research vessel that set out from Reykjavik and traveled towards Greenland, about halfway between Iceland and Greenland, and then made transects all the way down to a couple of 100 kilometers south of Iceland. I was aboard a ship with R&Ds. She and I were the two humanities arts scholars aboard, and otherwise we had 10 sailors and 10 researchers coming out of the physical sciences. The intention of this particular research trip was to take a selection of water samples at different depths in order to check phytoplankton biodiversity and abundance, but also to take deep sea or deep ocean sediment cores. In the image that you can see on your screen right now in the upper left, you see a map of Iceland. This is generated by our wonderful oceanographer at the University of Iceland, Angela Rawlings, and Hvala, on this particular map where you're looking also down into the depths to the bottom of the ocean. The black lines show our transects. So this is where we sailed, the transect, and then the stars are the places, the locations where we took core samples. We took two types of core samples. One type uses a gravity core. It's a very large, long metal tube, which is hoisted up. You would have seen it in the last video, and then held vertically, and then just dropped down into the ocean. Punches a hole in the ocean floor. Literally has like a Tipex label on the gravity core on the ship that says contraption that punches a hole in the floor. And then what's inside of that punching down into the ocean floor, that comes up, that sediment comes up, and it is packaged off so that it can undergo a series of data collection points to get a sense of what is present within the sediment, the age of the sediment, etc. On the bottom left-hand side, you'll see a screen cap or a screen grab that was taken by Paul Kreutz, marine geologist, who was aboard from a Topaz echo sounder system that they were using in order to kind of map out the ocean floor quite deep. And you can see the two little blue spots are a couple of locations where they chose to make this kind of incision into the floor. While we were aboard, I became quite entranced with the second type of core that we were using. Gravity core is one, the other one is called a rumor core. And the rumor core, which you can see is, of course, up close on the left, but in play, having just come up from the ocean floor on the right here. It's using a transparent tube so that you see exactly what the ocean floor looks like when it comes back up. And I inquired with Dr. Catherine Richardson, the lead scientist on the research vessel, and also the primary instigator, the founder of ROCS, how one might go about acquiring a core for art research. And the team very generously took a core sample for me to then use with an exhibition. And the exhibition that I set up in Hafnaborg in 2021 had the core present, and I also painted a kind of blackboard along the wall within the space. The idea being that I wanted to create a kind of participatory interaction for people coming to witness or be with this deep ocean sediment core, a sediment core that was taken from almost 1,700 meters below the ocean. This a kind of thing that is imponderable or unknowable, but yet is in the process of potentially being impacted by deep ocean carbon sequestration, one of the many possible solutions that's being kicked around to address carbon footprint issues. I was also interested in working with chalk and this notion of writing on the chalkboard, because chalk is made of calcium carbonate, which is what zooplankton fall down onto the ocean floor as. Chalk is a sedimentary carbonate rock, and these plankton that fall onto the floor compress to form a limestone. If you're interested in seeing more about this, I recently published an essay, a video article called Sentient Sentences and Sentiments, Sensing Deep Ocean Sediment Through Artistic Practice. And that's published in the Journal for Embodied Research. I'm not going to talk too much longer because I don't want to strain our time terribly, but I will mention one of the other outputs that occurred during the postdoc came in the form of Spear Festival, which somebody's not muted. And Spear Festival took place at the National Arts Centre Orchestra in Ottawa, Canada, this last September. And for this particular festival, I worked together with the music director, Alexander Shelley, for the orchestra, and we created a 4-day festival for listening in the time of climate crisis and biodiversity loss. I was in particular excited to be working through the framework of Earth system science, which is something that Catherine Richardson, again, the scientist that I mentioned earlier and the founder of ROCS, that she has helped to think through along with other scientists for the last many years, kind of thinking through a sense of how to understand structures or functions of the Earth as interrelated. So biosphere, geosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere. What are the different connections that are present within those, rather than these being unrelated or disparate subjects that kind of have that are disciplinary, separate. I also, through conversations with Catherine, became quite interested in thinking through the festival for listening as related not only to climate crisis, but also biodiversity loss. When I was initially in conversation with the managing director of the orchestra, the interest was to focus on climate change. And again, through the conversations that I'd been having with Catherine, I then advocated to also include biodiversity loss. we would see back here planetary boundaries, tipping points, Earth system sciences, and even the Anthropocene. These are all kind of new terms, portmanteau neologisms that have come up over the last 20 to 30 years, arising through the sciences, but in particular related to Earth system science, that attempt to address or reframe what the systems are that regulate Earth's stability and resilience, that make it possible for humans to sustain. You can see here on the left-hand side that this came out this last year. This is a revised graph, but safe operating spaces showing, where kind of status quo of okayness exists. And then we can see as we move out into these other areas where we're over the tipping point of a kind of stable function, and does threaten to shift how humans are existing on the planet. You'll see within the biosphere integrity, this is where biodiversity loss would fall, and as Catherine says, like, we are quite at beyond the tipping point here. I mentioned at the outset, I showed you that the video work, and I said that I would mention it again near the end. While I was thinking through, again, how to kind of pair or partner the sense of those primary planetary systems, lithosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, within the context of a festival on listening and symphony orchestra, I thought, what might happen if I were to invite 4 different Icelandic ecosystem components to interact with or play one instrument each from the different orchestra instrument families. So brass, strings, percussion, woodwinds. I ended up shooting a video working with Patrick Onkovich as the cinematographer, and again, José Luis Anderson as the composer. And we took the trumpet to strand on a black sand beach during a sandstorm to see how the sand plays the brass. We took a violin to a moss field and a winter moth, kind of explored the strings and the body of the instrument. We took timpani mallets from percussion and placed them underneath a glacier that was quite actively melting on the edge of Solheimjökull, and then finally took a flute to a geothermal area with sulfur fumaroles, and invited the fumarole to play the flute. Final piece that's come out of this, this was shown in Grandiose in Denmark this past autumn. And here I'm kind of thinking through returning to this notion of whales and becoming with whales, but thinking through relationality with whales in a speculative future. Using the materiality of the microscope slide, for the particular installation here, I blew up the microscope slide about 15 times its normal size, and then had printed on it Der Hvaler I Måsen. Der Hvaler I Måsen is it's a idiom that has that it's based on an idiom that does exist within some Scandinavian languages. Those of you who have a fluency in Scandinavian languages would recognize it as there are ugler I mossen. There are owls in the bog or moss. This idiom actually had a previous iteration. It's the ugler or the owls are the second animal to show up in this idiom. The original one was there are ulve I mossen, there are wolves in the moss. But after the extermination of wolves in Denmark in the early 1800s, the decision was made to shift from wolves to owls. The idiomatic implication of whatever animal is present within the moss is that something's awry, something's not right, something is, fishy, or there might be mischief afoot. I chose to write the hval I mossen as a way to kind of suggest, well, what happens in the future, a very, very far future, of the potential increased cetacean stranding on Danish shorelines. How might that idiomatic expression also undergo its own shift towards hvaler? How do we start to tune back into our language and what more than human entities we are placing within them? Yeah. Wow, that was a long talk. I just wanted to thank you all so much for being with me for this time. And yeah.